Hi folks, you're with Tassus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the breaking down, and the very clear and obvious breaking down of not necessarily law and order, but the application of the rule of law, and the breaking down of due legal process, the impartial exercising of law. For example, let's suppose, and I'll have a few examples here, but the police around the world are in effect protecting climate change protesters. So if angry and frustrated motorists try to move these protests, which are illegal, by the way, it's illegal to block a highway or a road. Yeah? But if the angry and irate motorists attempt to move the protesters out the way, the police will swoop in and arrest the motorist, but not the law-breaking protest. And we see this time and time again. Now, this is a blatant, brazen act by the state, or series of acts by the state to provide all the resources of the state to protect the climate change or the climate protesters. Now, whether these protests, they've applied for a permit or the laws are very clear. You can't just block a highway because you feel like it. The laws are quite clear on that. And yet the police have been instructed all across the Western world to not interfere with these climate protesters, but to arrest anyone or threaten anybody who disrupts the climate protesters or attempts to move them out the way so they can get to work or go about their business. So we've got an insane situation where the lawbreakers that are breaking the laws of the state are being protected by the state against anyone else. Now, let's suppose that there was a case, and this is representative of a number of cases. There's a case where a woman had blocked a major highway and had glued herself to the car and all this sort of thing, and she refused numerous requests by the police to move on and move out the way and so on. So the police arrested her for not only the disturbance being caused, but also for refusing to accept a lawful directive of an officer of the law, which again is a crime. Yet. When I was a little surprised that the Department of Prosecutions actually decided to prosecute this. Most of the time, they drop it. They say, nah, let's not worry about it. Nah, assuming the police even get around to arresting these people in the first place. So the Department of Prosecutions decides to prosecute, and they're very lukewarm. They put a very junior lawyer on it, like a beginner lawyer who clearly doesn't want to be doing it. It's a very half-assed effort by the state, as if they're trying to make some flim-flam show of it, but they don't really want to prosecute this person. And meanwhile, the climate protester gets free legal aid from a top-flight lawyer. All the expenses are paid. Everything is paid for by the NGOs and all the other various climate groups. So she has to meet no expense herself, no inconvenience. All the costs she's not out of pocket one penny. And then after that, they even give her a job as a consultant on a pay. So the rewards for doing this are very high. Now she's a silly little idiot and has no idea what she's talking about and thinks she's being stunning and brave. But really, there's no downside. It's easy to be stunning and brave when you don't have to face consequences. But again, we're looking at the state allowing this law breaking to take place, or protecting it or facilitating it, then very reluctantly prosecuting, if at all, which is rare. Then the case manages to somehow end up in front of an activist judge who is very pro-climate action, in fact, aggressively pro-climate. Somehow that judge gets to hear the case. Now, that wouldn't happen in the real world. So that's deliberately set up there to make sure that the most sympathetic judge they can possibly lay their hands on gets to hear this case. and lets this woman off, this young woman off with not even a fine or a recorded conviction. So she's straight back on the street with a clean record, and other than the inconvenience of having to attend the court case, which again, all her expenses were paid, lawyer, the whole thing. Even the the food while she was food and accommodation while she was moving around for the court case. So she suffers no penalty. Now this is something that let's look at people that go into Christian churches and trash them or burn them or steal anything of value and walk off with it. A very small number of them are arrested, and the police show very little interest in actually pursuing it. So again, why not? Well, why don't the police show interest in pursuing it? It's pretty clear they've been told that, look, unless something really egregious happens, don't bother. If it's just an attack on a Christian church, irrelevant. We don't care. Christianity, we don't care. Now, that just so happens to be the same position that the globalists have. That Christianity is an obstacle to the globalization project. It's a source of cohesion for white societies that the globalists want to replace. So attacking Christianity, that's quite acceptable because it's in service of the globalist project. So the law, even though there are laws that you can't go, well, you can't break and enter and steal, even though there are laws, numerous laws are being broken by this, the state isn't really interested in pursuing it. It's a law on the statute books that the lawmakers of the land have voted for, but they don't care. It's not irrelevant. However, somebody put a few rashers of bacon on the steps of a mosque. Now, that was different. That is something that requires immediate response. It requires the full force of the law to be employed to get those downright fucking fascist fucking Nazis. That's what is required. But the Christian church, doesn't matter. So again, we see laws that are being very, very selectively applied. Now, we can go on, I can go on almost forever here, that BLM and Antifa rioters could run riot, burn things down, beat people up, commit all sorts of crimes, and the police stood by and watched. Some were arrested, but relative to the mayhem, very few were arrested. And they had to be caught kind of red-handed. There was one thing where an Antifa activist kicked somebody to death, and that was caught on film, on video, and that person did get arrested, and you couldn't miss it. There was their full face was seen on it, and they got arrested. But they got a very light sentence, surprisingly light. You kick someone to death because it was a black guy kicking a white guy to death, and it's not that big a deal, huh? The oppression. So again, we find the state reluctant to actually do anything. Oh, well, we'll do it if you want us to, I suppose. All right then. But our real job is to fight Nazis. So we saw the reluctance. Now let's compare that to the people who during the COVID lockdowns, the people who protested against the lockdowns. Now, the police came out in force there, quite brutal by comparison. You compare their behaviour with the Antifa and the BLM riots, and it was very hands-off, very kid gloves. But when it came to the white people, and the COVID protesting the COVID lockdowns, then the response was quite brutal. Again, all the organs of the state, the full force of the law was employed to go after those people. January 6th is a case in point. Very minor damage occurred. In the overall scheme of things, there was no armed activity, nothing got burned down or anything like that. So it was not that big a deal in the overall scheme of things. Certainly not compared to the Antifa and the BLM riots, yet again, all the organs of the state were employed to vigorously and aggressively chase after those people. But the numerous Antifa and BLM rioters, many of whom committed serious crimes, they've either been not prosecuted at all, or if they were arrested, let go. And some have even been given compensation payments for some imaginary oppression that they may have suffered. It's insane. But we see this difference in the very selective application of the law. So the laws aren't the law. It's no longer the law. It's ideological, and the globalist project being ideological, it's now a situation where was the law breaking or is the law breaking in service of the globalist project? Because if it was, we don't really want to prosecute it. We probably won't prosecute it. And if anybody is prosecuted, then we'll make sure there are NGOs and all sorts of other groups that will pay their legal fees, so they're protected. If you break the law in service of the globalist project, you are now a protected class, and you won't suffer any consequence, or hardly any, a bit of inconvenience perhaps, but that'll be it. Everything will be paid for. There'll be an army of NGOs that will come along to get you lawyers and pay your legal bills. But if you break the law in a way that is not in service of the globalist project or hinders the globalist project in some way, then the full force of the law will be used against you. Every organ of the state will be used to chase after you and to crush you. Now, I could also look at how this breakdown of law and order is seeped into pretty much everything. All laws, and policies tied to laws, or corporate procedures, or anything tied or related to the law, is breaking down. Whether you call it whether it's arbitrary affirmative action, hiring policies in organisations, arbitrary dismissal of straight white males, and some of the most insane things that we see around the place, where the snot-nosed 19-year-old HR, the diversity officer in the HR department, effectively is a commissar vetting any straight white males to make sure they're not and believing they have some sort of moral legal right to do so. So whenever ideology is in play, whether it's the communist sort of or the globalists in this case, or any ideology, the ideology transcends the law. There is now the law, and then above that is the ideology, and below to the side or slightly lower off is the elected representatives. The ideology is now the supreme law, and that can be interpreted in any way they sort of want it to. Now, if you look at, say, in Britain, Nigel Farage, the well-known politician, one of the big banks, a bank that's, by the way, has a heavy over-representation of the well-to-do. I think you need a minimum balance of, I think it's $1 million US. I could be wrong there, but I think it's certainly in that region. It could be £1 million actually, British pounds. You need $1 million. I'll use dollars for the sake of it, the argument at the moment. But $1 million, there's a minimum amount, so it's clearly not for the average guy around town. And they shut down Nigel Farage's account, on the basis that he was a political undesirable. That is, he's not pro the globalist project, or not sufficiently pro. So they just conclude the executives of the bank, who must be SJW sort of flunkies or something like that. I don't know. What business person would do this? They wouldn't. A person who's employed to actually run a business just wouldn't even dream of doing this. So they decide arbitrarily, we don't like you, and we'll conspire with the other banks to make sure that you can't have a bank account in Great Britain, anywhere, in any bank. And we can do that. We can do that because we're morally ideologically allowed to do it. The laws don't apply anymore. The ideology applies, but not the law. When we control the ideology, and we're morally superior enough to control it, then not only does the law not apply, but if we do want to use the law, it is our absolute arbitrary discretion to use it for our own ideological purposes. The law doesn't exist as a law anymore. It exists as a series of optional devices to further the ideology, the globalist ideology. So they just dismiss Farage. Now it was probably an ill-considered move. Farage's quite a prominent guy. He's got he's well known. He's been around for a while. his reputation, as much as they attempt to slander him, the globalists, his reputation seems pretty much intact as far as I can tell. And he's quite, as I understand it, quite well to do, and he's got quite a media presence and quite a substantial media presence. So it was probably ill-considered to do this. So Farage pushes back, and then they try and say, as I understand it, the bank tries to say, yeah, well, he didn't. It's actually nothing to do with his politics. He just didn't meet some criteria that we have. I think it was the minimum threshold for the amount of money you have in the account. If you fall below a certain threshold, then they can close your account. They can't do that arbitrarily, I wouldn't have thought, but anyway, they decided to throw that. That was clearly something that they just thought of and rapid fired it from, a rabbit shot from the hip. And hoping that would quell it. They had the BBC and the much of the mainstream media on side, but it sobered people up that anybody can just be arbitrarily cut off from their bank account at any time by any bank, should that bank take the fancy, should decide, we don't like a look at Billy Bob's face, let's just close his account. Now, the banks have all sorts of things that they bring out, policies. For example, if you don't have a transaction on your account, what used to be over a 18-month period, then they could close your account. Now they say, well, that's our policy. You should have known. We don't have to tell you. Even if you've got money in the account, they just put the money in some sort of holding, like an escrow thing, and then it's up to you to work out that they've got it and where it is, and then you have to go through this mountain of bureaucratic paperwork to actually get your own money. Then they changed that from 18 months to 12 months. So if you didn't have a transaction in your account in 12 months, then that became 6 months in a number of banks. Now, there's no, if there is any they claim they send a letter out, but those letters never seem to appear and can never be found, nor can they give you a copy. We only keep copies for 30 days. So they absolve themselves of all responsibility to either tell you what they're doing or to prove that they told you. So the banks are, it's some may say a real dirty business in deception and treachery, but nonetheless, so they try this on Farage, but once people sort of the thought crossed their minds, hey, this could happen to anybody, then even some of the left-wing media that are typically pro-globalist, they thought, no, we better just have another look at this. But it was quite monstrous in my view. And it shows that the head goons at the bank, as far as I can tell at least, are just a bunch of globalist, hack goon stooges. They're not fucking executives of anything. You wouldn't hire them to sweep the fucking floor. They're just globalist stooges. That's all. Collecting multi-gazillion dollar pay packets, by the way. I've actually sat next to, on some occasions, or a few occasions, I've sat next to some of the executives at the very apex of the banking institutions, people that are taking home, getting paid $3 million minimum, up to sort of $10, $11, $12 million a year for supposedly running the bank. And it's in Australia at least, it's like a cartel oligopoly. So some blindfold person with an IQ of minus 50 could produce a profitable result in those circumstances. And so they're not very impressive people. Maybe they're charming. Maybe they know how to charm the people, the patronage givers, and that I don't doubt. And you'd have to be reasonably good at not offending the people that can affect your career and that sort of stuff. But otherwise, there's they've got nothing. They're just bureaucrats. They've achieved nothing, produced nothing, created nothing, and they're just hacks and goons. And which is, I suspect, what the folks at that bank in England are. Bankers seem to come out of a factory all around the world. but again, this idea that the bank has that, well, the laws don't apply to us. We're acting in service of the globalist project, so we can do whatever the fuck we want. Now, this is the same in the communist sort of era, where just say the Soviet Union, communist Eastern Europe, and even today that we see it in China and North Korea. If you're acting in service of the ideology, then you're allowed a vast latitude in what you choose to prosecute, who you choose to prosecute, how aggressive that prosecution is, whether the due legal process is adhered to. Maybe they've got 100 witnesses that say they've got nothing to do with this, or weren't there, or didn't do that. Then the arbitrary application of or due legal process means you can just, well, the court says we don't accept any of your witnesses, and we don't have to give you a reason why. Because you've got no witnesses, you're therefore guilty. Off to prison you go, or the firing squad, or whatever it might be. And we see this sort of arbitrary law, say, in the divorce courts, where the evidence against the wife or the woman is damning, but the court simply dismisses that evidence. Nah, don't care. There's one case where the woman had threatened a witness that was against her, threatened a witness that goons would come round to the guy's place and kick the shit out of him if he didn't retract his evidence. And he got that on tape and recorded it. And this was damning, absolutely damning against the woman. But the court dismissed it on a technicality that she hadn't given her consent after the recording that threat could be used as evidence, which is nobody's going to do that. But using that absurd and quite illegal technicality, the court just dismissing that. So these are the sorts of things that arbitrary law bring you, and particularly ideological law, because the law is now subservient to the ideology. And so lawbreakers, have you broken the law? Well, not really, because that helps the ideology. Ideologically, you haven't broken the law, because climate change protesting or climate protesting is something we need to undermine the Western societies. And so we need that ideologically, we need it. So they're acting in service of the ideology, therefore they're not really breaking the law. And because the globalists control all the Western governments, they're able to say, we'll go soft on these people, don't prosecute them at all, or whatever. And this is what ideology. So this represents a clear breakdown in law and order, application of the law, prosecution of law, and so on. That the entire legal establishment and all all the apparatus of government has all been taken over now by the ideological imperative of the globalist project. And these people believe they have the absolute right to do it. The same goes for all the big multinational firms, particularly the financial firms, but others too, that they've been sort of subsumed, if you like, into the wider globalist sort of ideological environment. So they're not there because they're good business people, they've done a good job, or they're there because they're in support of the globalist project and are there to aid and abet it and to support it ideologically and with practical measures like getting rid of Farage. This is all part of in service of the globalist project, but it shows that the law now has effectively fragmented to a point where it is very much subservient to the globalist ideology, very much so. And as far as I'm concerned, that represents a complete breakdown in the law and order and the rule of law and so on, because the law is now arbitrarily applied based on ideology and no other reason. Now, sure, there are still some things like, I don't know, somebody going speeding, for example. They're doing 200 miles an hour in a 100 mile an hour zone or 50 mile an hour zone. They would still be fined and arrested. But maybe not. I notice how many times black and brown people are being let off, and you see it now all over the United States by the Soros-appointed DAs. Black and brown people are not being prosecuted for crimes that white people are being prosecuted for. And also, things like, say, George Floyd, where the guy's a career criminal. He's high on some drug that's going to kill him because he's taken so much of it, and he's barely coherent, and he's freaking out when the police arrive because of the amount of drugs he's got in his system. He's a career criminal, and yet he's created by that ideology, the same ideology that doesn't prosecute certain crimes but vigorously prosecutes others, and he's touted as a saint and used ruthlessly and aggressively by the same globalist ideological fanatics that support the climate activists. So we see now that the law has all but disappeared and has simply become an ideological haze of expediency and a series of expediency used by the globalists to further implement their projects. You've been a Tasselist today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.